Okay, well, I'd like to introduce my friend as someone I admire greatly. Olivia is a vet, and she lives on the Sunshine Coast, close to where I do. I first met Olivia when I was a full-time journalist, and I really, she was an inspiration for me because she is a Lonely Planet author at the time, and that was probably my goal at that time. This was, I don't know, when was this? About 15 years ago or something like that, I think, a long time ago. And what I thought being a Lonely Planet author would be the most amazing job on earth. So she's done that. But then I find that we've also got these other connections with wildlife and wildlife care. And obviously I'm not a vet, but we still have some of the same passions. So I'm really, really proud to introduce you to my friend Olivia. And yeah, let's hear about some of your adventures, shall we?
Well, thank you, Sarah, for inviting me to speak today. It's always a pleasure to chat with you about animals and conservation, as they're topics that, we're both very passionate about.
Absolutely.
So I'm just going to see if I can share my screen and let me know if there's any problems here.
It's coming.
Right.
Looking good.
Okay. So I'll just start off with, as a vet, I've had a,
There you go.
just,
Click that one.
yeah.
There you go. You're on.
So as a vet, I've had a varied and adventurous veterinary career, but in today's talk, I'd like to focus on my dealings with wildlife and animal welfare. Today's veterinary graduates can study further to become specialised wildlife vets, but when I graduated, there were no separate vet specialties. So our studies were focused on small animals, dogs and cats, horses and livestock, which would be, cattle, sheep, pigs, poultry, and goats. So wildlife medicine was something that you picked up along the way by trial and error, as and when you needed. And working in country practices, people often brought in injured orphans, injured or orphan joeys and koalas and birds. And I'm just going to see is that advancing, Sarah? Great. Yeah. So there were no dedicated wildlife hospitals, and there were no organised wildlife groups or anything like that. So it was up to the vets in the practices and any interested members of the community to care for these animals. So I've cared and shared my home with a number of, joeys and baby possums. Actually, in one of the practices I worked in, the boss had built a number of koala enclosures, and it was our job to clean out the enclosures and feed and treat them as well. And you learned on the job, so to speak. And I think that having that background in my early vet career really helped enormously, because it fostered an ability to think outside the square, excuse me, and to be willing to see and treat any sort of animal. And some of the interesting animals that I've worked on include camels. I was the vet on a camel expedition in the heart of Australia, doing a cesarean on an egg-bound python, a cuscus here in Papua New Guinea that sort of got tangled in my hair, and also, treated, fight wounds and dingoes and stitched up monkeys, and also this was an interesting case, diagnosing a liger with calcium deficiency. Now, this isn't the liger that I treated, it's just a pick off the internet, but a liger is a cross between a lion and a tiger. And this was still in the days when circuses had animals, which we know is not a good thing, but this is back in the 1980s. And the lion tamer from this particular circus had suddenly left, and the care of the big cats came down into the hands of somebody who was inexperienced. And this liger was fed an all-meat diet. And the circus owner noted that the cub seemed a bit weak, particularly as it was jumping out of the wagon, it sort of collapsed on its front legs. So they brought the cub in, and we took an X-ray because we thought, all meat diet, calcium deficiency, and all young animals require calcium for their, particularly for bone strength. And the X-ray showed, yes, it was a calcium deficiency, and it was easily corrected by supplementing with calcium. And I just remember that cub very clearly, because it was, even though it had been handled, It had been born actually in the circus. It was still really feisty, and it was just absolutely, beautiful. As well as traveling circus animals, as country vets, we often had to deal with any minor problems at the local zoo. And when this happened, I would usually bring the zoo vet at Adelaide Zoo. He was a pretty renowned zoo vet. He's actually since gone on to write a number of books about being a zoo vet, and he was enormously helpful. So I'd ring to find out, what drug I could use on whatever species, like, what anesthetic could I use in a monkey, or what antibiotics to use in crocodiles. And speaking of crocodiles, I worked in the Kimberley region of West Australia for a time, TB or tuberculosis testing on cattle stations. But the day I arrived, my first case as I hopped off the plane was to assist my boss in pinning the jaw of a saltwater crocodile. And that was an amazing introduction to the wild west frontier of Australia. And this isn't the crocodile in question. It's actually a Nile crocodile. And it's a bit gruesome because that actually is the arm of a vet that it had just bitten off. Just pretty gruesome, but just goes to show that working with wildlife can be quite dangerous. So in the 1980s, the Kimberley really was Australia's last frontier, and I loved the wide open spaces and sleeping in my swag and mustering with the ringers and, living a part of Australia's history, because it was like stepping back 100 years in time. And as one of the first female vets to work in this remote region, I was constantly amused at the stockman's amazement at having a lady vet in what was then considered to be a man's world. It's very different today, where women make up about 80% of veterinary graduates, but back in my day, it was less than 40%. And after the Kimberley, I moved to the Middle East to work for an Arabian prince. And female vets were a rarity in this part of the world as well, so I enjoyed a semi-celebrity status. And for 9 years, I lived in the desert oasis town of Al Ain in the United Arab Emirates, working as a dairy cattle and sheep vet for the Crown Prince. And during this time, I treated a number of Arabian oryx, which is a type of antelope native to the Middle East. And actually, the Arabian oryx became extinct in the wild in 1972, but the Crown Prince set up a nature reserve on an island of Abu Dhabi and was able to breed a considerable population of oryx. They were reintroduced to other Arab countries, so much so that in 2011, their fresh category was downgraded from extinct in the wild to vulnerable. And the Arab sheikhs are known for keeping exotic. So this was just some of the boys playing around. But the Arab sheikhs are known for keeping exotic animals. And I was fascinated by their sport of falconry. In the late afternoon, it was common to see 2 or 3 white-robed men training their falcons with feather lures. And falconry dates back to an age of survival, when the Bedouin would capture these birds during their annual migrations from Eurasia to Africa. And they'd capture them and then train them to hunt the Hubara bustard, which is what the Bedouins like to eat. And it's an honoured tradition. And the falconers really love their animals. They love their birds and they take great care of it. Like one of the falconers I knew would always say, "You are a real falconer when you love the bird, know what is best for it, and do not exploit it." And although falconry began as a means of survival for the Bedouin, and it involved catching and taming wild birds of prey, nowadays falcons are bred in captivity and are quite used to humans and being handled. Now, this is with the lure training falcons to come in and catch what would be the prey. And another country that where birds of prey are captured and trained to hunt small prey for humans is Mongolia. And the eagle hunters of Mongolia are romanticized in films and literature, and they've got an honored place in their society. Now, in this tradition, wild eagles are captured and used and trained, and then used for 5 to 6 years and then released back to the wild. And when they're not, hunting is a natural behavior for eagles, but when they're not used for hunting, they're hooded and tethered to a post, unable to fly. Now, I know that the eagle hunters love and respect their birds and would be greatly upset if anyone were to say otherwise. But personally, when I traveled in Mongolia, I didn't like seeing these regal beings tethered and their freedom restricted. And even though I can appreciate that different cultures have different traditions and the concept and respect and affection towards sentient beings can vary enormously, I do have strong reservations around the taming of any wild creature. I've always loved African wildlife, and had I graduated in this day and age, I'm sure I would have studied to be a wildlife vet in Africa. And I've spent a bit of time in Africa in a number of African countries. And one thing that really stands out for me in Zimbabwe and South Africa is just how similar the landscape looks to our Australian bush. So it's quite disconcerting to walk through the bush and come across a lion kill or a giraffe, head poking out of the tree canopy. In Zimbabwe, I helped relocate zebra from one game park to another, checking vitals after the animals were sedated. And much of the work I was assisting with concerned animals on game parks or in wildlife sanctuaries. In South Africa, I attended a wildlife capture course, which was an amazing experience. We were learning drug regimes and practicalities for darting, but we were also helping the Kruger National Park's vets with their work. And one of their projects was to investigate the effects of tuberculosis on the lion population in Kruger. And tuberculosis, or TB, was first introduced into the park by Cape buffalo back in the 1950s, which had mingled with infected cattle herds on the surrounding farms. And, passing up the food chain when a lion would eat TB-infected meat, they, were seeing what the outcome of that was. And at the time, we were conducting research on the TB, but as of today, it's now known that 54% of lions in Kruger have tuberculosis, and it causes an awful, debilitating, wasting disease. Now, to take samples from the lions, we staked out a dead zebra around a tree, and then over loudspeakers, we played like hyenas in a feeding frenzy. And every now and then, we'd shine the spotlight on the dead zebra and see if there were any lions. And this particular night, around midnight, there was a lion pride and chomping on the zebra. And we hadn't heard anything. We're only about 20 meters away. And so we darted 3 of the lions. And as they dropped, we hurriedly crossed over to this 20 meters to load them onto our stretchers. And it was a bit of a tense situation because there was still, all these tawny shapes flitting around, and you sort of expected a shadow to suddenly spring into life. But the Kruger vet, Dewalt, assured me that lions were too lazy to chase fresh meat when a perfectly good carcass lay dead at their feet. And I guess he was right, because as we loaded the stretchers and hurried back to the trucks, I could hear the sound of flesh and bone being, devoured behind me. And we worked in the open. We had 3 trucks and we put them into like a U shape. And it gave us a bit of a false sense of security, but there were still, lions around. And we took blood samples and semen samples. We took girth measurements, paw measurements, checked for wounds and parasites, and checked their teeth and fitted radio collars. And under the effect of the drugs we used, the lions weren't completely out to it. So they were still grunting and twitching, which when you're working on a lion is a bit disconcerting. And then bonus excitement as after we'd finished and we carried the sleeping patients back to the zebra carcass so that the rest of the pride could, look over them. Another lion pride arrived, and this male lion, started grunting, and I wasn't fazed until Dewalt unholstered his pistol and muttered the classic line, "Whatever you do, don't run." And it was only 20 meters back to the safety of the vehicles, but it was a long 20 meters. Actually, before I move on, that night is so clear to me because it got even better. Around after we'd finished, we were driving back to camp, and it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was silvery and misty light, and everyone was quiet because we were riding, the tail of the adrenaline high after the midnight lion hunt. And I could see two young lions catnapping on the road ahead. And they could see us coming and they were totally unfazed. And then we actually stopped right beside them, and I could have reached my hand out the window and touched them.
Wow.
And yeah, it was amazing. And then, one of them got up and stretched, gave us a very disdainful look and started padding down the road. And his mate did the same. And we kept pace with them. And, their disdain was absolutely magnificent because they were the kings of Africa and they knew it. And then suddenly they veered off the road and were swallowed by the night. But it was such a powerful moment of understanding how insignificant we are in their domain. And that moment just left an indelible, imprint on me, and it's one I'll never forget. And working with the Kruger vets was an amazing experience. We darted wildlife from vehicles, on foot, and out of low-flying helicopters. And when we rounded up and darted herds of Cape buffalo, they dropped where we darted them, and it, across the savannah, and it looked like a Wild West bison hunt. And the drug that we used, etorphine or M99, causes a rapid induction, but the animals still remain sensitive to stimuli. So we had to blindfold them, and then we'd after we'd taken all the measurements that we needed, they were craned, hoisted onto the bed of the back of a truck, and they were then taken to a disease-free buffalo breeding project. And the project was established to breed buffalo calves free of TB and other diseases so that they could be moved out of Kruger and used to populate other national parks. At the time that I was there, none of the elephants had tested positive for TB. This is in Africa in Kruger. But we were still darting and collecting samples and fitting them with radio collars as well. And when elephants are darted, they have to breathe through their nasal passages. So we had to put a twig inserted at the end of their trunk to keep the external opening open. And I recall sticking my hand into the mouth of the darted elephant and being amazed that even my outstretched hand didn't even cover the top of a single molar tooth. So cheetahs are also endangered for a number of reasons, actually. There's population bottlenecks and a lot of inbreeding since the last ice age, which has caused low genetic variability and abnormal sperm counts. And a lot of cheetah cubs, they have a high infant mortality. And there's a conservation centre at Kruger that has a captive breeding program, and here we were taking some samples as well. Now, the most dangerous animal in Africa is the very comical looking hippo. And on a canoe trip down the Zambezi River, we were keeping a very respectful distance from these hippos, but they go underneath water and then suddenly pop up next to your canoe. So on that trip, we were camping on islands in the river, and at night we could hear gunfire in the distance and poachers. And as you know, poaching exists in Africa on an enormous scale. And even though national parks rangers are armed, they're armed and authorised to shoot poachers, it's a very bitter war. And the illegal wildlife trade is rife with elephant tusks and rhino horn and skins and furs and other, animal products for traditional Chinese medicine. And then there's the trafficking of live animals like pangolins and lion and cheetah cubs, baby chimps, and the canned hunting industry. I mean, the list goes on. It's heartbreaking to think of all the cruel ways that people, can be so cruel to the living beings that live beside us. It's not enough that they have to contend with disease and natural disasters and climate issues, but humans as well. And it's a massive topic, as we all know. After completing the course and after a few more trips to Africa, I looked into ways of sidestepping into the world of vetting on African wildlife. But at the time, it was difficult even for South African vets to gain a coveted job at Kruger. So it was virtually impossible for an outsider. So sadly, my dream fizzled. But what remained from that experience was a deeper understanding of the plight of endangered wildlife, and not just in Africa, but worldwide, and how it's a never-ending mission, to help these animals and to help try to prevent these species from dying out. And conservationists are at the forefront of this battle, and they do an amazing job. But everyone can help, especially by increasing awareness of wildlife and educating others. And, encouraging people to go on safari, to view the wildlife, to have that sort of interaction from a distance, and educating the upcoming generation. I mean, that's all important. And Sarah, you've written about Dr. Wong and sun bears, and your children's books, they highlight many wildlife creatures. And your podcasts, your interviews and workshops, they're all ways of spreading the word. So what you do really inspires and educates, and that's really important. But everyone can do
that
some.
We all do our bit, don't we?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And as a fellow writer, I've also had the opportunity to interview and profile conservationists and wildlife warriors and highlight various wildlife topics, like how to be a responsible wildlife tourist, talking about sniffer dogs, saving koalas and sniffer rats in Cambodia. And some of the amazing people I've interviewed include Dr. Alex Tinson, who's a camel vet and cloning expert, looking into cloning some, animals on the brink of extinction. Dr. Niall McCann, he's the presenter from National Geographic's Biggest and Baddest. But Dr. McCann also set up a national park rescue organisation in Africa, and it helps national parks, struggling national parks recover, and trains rangers to fight against poachers. And there's Leo Biddle, a UK zoologist who has spent the last 20 odd years running a wildlife sanctuary in Malaysian Borneo, and Casey Woodward, who's a good friend of mine and a vet nurse and the founder of Animal Assist, an animal charity that supports organisations and projects in Asia.
And she's actually helped Wong as well. So that's what she's been here and chatted with us, but she's someone we love, Casey.
Yes, she's a real go-getter.
Yeah,
very passionate. And like by writing these stories, I'm sure, Sarah, you agree, we just want to inspire others and try and help the animals of the world. Now, although the path of a wildlife vet didn't eventuate for me, animal welfare has developed into a huge passion of mine. And during my extensive travels, as with Lonely Planet and others, I've witnessed the suffering, from cruelty and neglect that animals suffer, especially in developing countries. And it was my exposure to this needless suffering that inspired me to do something about it. As a vet, I have the skills to help animals, and I really felt I needed to do something. I currently work as a vet in animal shelters, treating homeless and injured animals, but I've also volunteered in developing countries, desexing and treating street dogs and cats. I've gone on, this is in India with Vets Beyond Borders. I've gone on solo animal welfare missions and also volunteered with Vets Beyond Borders. Actually here we're in Sikkim in India, and we were desexing on a trap neuter release program. We're treating sick animals, and we also had rabies campaigns. And if you're not sure what a trap neuter release program is, it's usually the street dogs tend to live in a certain sort of area or zone. So they're trapped, they're brought back to a facility where they're desexed, and then they're released back to their territory. And this is all in an effort, obviously, to curb the number of animals born and increasing, the stray population, and trying to give them a bit of a better quality of life. A lot of the average age of a street dog in Cambodia is 3 years. They suffer from enormous amounts of disease and mange and you name it. And in 2019, I led a team of vets and vet nurses to Cambodia, and we desexed and treated over 200 dogs and cats. And these are some pics from that mission. We collaborated with local animal welfare groups and a local vet to run the project. And we also assisted the Cambodian vet in his vet clinic. And in Cambodia, the street dogs and cats tend to be dumped at the local monasteries. So we're mainly doing the desexing under, under a tree at the monasteries. And the monks, they care for the animals, but they still, need a lot of vaccination, worming, mange treatments, and desexing them, as I said, alleviates them of a lot of the stress of being pregnant and caring for little puppies or kittens when they're not healthy themselves. And these are some more pics, so out desexing out in the open. And that was the local Cambodian vet who was assisting us as well. And just some months ago, I was due to lead a trap neuter release program, street dogs in Vanuatu for Vets Beyond Borders. However, I had to forego the opportunity. And the reason I couldn't take on the project is the same reason that I haven't been as active in the animal world and conservation world in the last few years as I would like to be. And that reason is my very precious 22-year-old cat, Pepper, who I adopted from the RSPCA where I worked. I adopted him when he was 13 years old. And now Pepper has kidney disease and diabetes and arthritis, and he's a veritable old man. And he'll turn 23 in April. And until he crosses the Rainbow Bridge, my travels are on pause. But the next animal welfare project in the works is a project I was organising before the COVID era hit. And I was in the process of organising a vet team to Borneo to support a veterinary dentist to do some dental work on sun bears. As you both know, Sarah and Wong, sun bears used in the bear bile trade in Southeast Asia, they're kept in horrific conditions. They're confined to small cages. They have their gallbladders stabbed repeatedly to extract bile for traditional Chinese medicine. And to make them more manageable, their teeth are often filed, cut off, and they're in chronic, tremendous pain. So our dental specialist, who actually happens to be a veterinary dental specialist as well as a human dentist, was, and we intend to take him over to assess the rescued sun bears and either extract or more likely do root canal fillings on the teeth. These sun bear pics are from Cambodia, from Free Bears. Aside from my passion for wildlife conservation and animal welfare, I've also written a book called Energy Healing for Your Dog and Cat. And in the book, I discuss energy healing, what it is and how it works. And it's a practical guide for pet owners. And it outlines the non-physical or energetic anatomy and has detailed instructions on how to use energy healing techniques on animals. And my superstar cat, Pepper, here is learning some of the tricks. Many pet owners who have read my book have told me how much they appreciate the fact that they can become more involved in their pet's healing process. So as you can see,
helpful for me, Olivia, because as you know, my dog Gypsy is a very anxious dog, and so
yeah.
it's been really helpful. But seeing Pepper reading it, Pepper's like your best advertisement, I think.
I think so. I mean, 22 years is a very long innings for a cat, and I don't think he would be there without, all the dedication that I've put into keeping him going
Yeah.
comfortably. And so, my veterinary path has taken all these twists and turns and fascinating sidetracks, and I just love the look of surprise on Dudley's face here. And I'm fortunate to be able to use my degree my vet degree to travel and have adventures and to live a parallel life as a writer. And I find that all of those traits have been useful in the world of wildlife and conservation and animal welfare. So, I hope my talk has sparked some interest in someone somewhere to be kinder and more compassionate to animals and to do whatever they can, whatever is in their ability to help the voiceless, animals of this planet. So that's my talk, Sarah. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely amazing there, Olivia. I'm enthralled, and half of those things I didn't know about you. So I've loved every second. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible adventurous life.